Hey everyone, we're going to get started. Genesis chapter 40. We're in Genesis chapter 40, so come hang out. We're going to do a Bible reading Genesis chapter 40. Okay, let's see, where's my. Here it is. Okay. Welcome everybody. Let's see. Okay. Welcome everybody. We're going to do Genesis chapter 40. This one's kind of a fast one, so it should be interesting. Let's see. This one's super short. Okay. Alrighty, Genesis chapter 40. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers and the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. Welcome, everybody. Genesis chapter 40. One night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. Hi there, welcome. Welcome, everybody. We're talking about dream interpretation. In case you want to hang out, Genesis chapter 40, it's all about dreams and dream interpretation. So it's going to be very interesting. Everybody go ahead and hit the subscribe button really quick. Go ahead and hit the like button right there really quick. We're going to do Genesis chapter 40. Welcome everybody. Hi there, welcome. We're in Genesis chapter 40. We're talking dream chat is what we're going to be talking tonight. So back to Genesis chapter 40, verse 5. And one night they both dreamed, and the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We've had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. The 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it's well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh. So get me out of this house, for I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that should put me into the pit. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket, there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up his head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So we'll take another look here at our supplemental text here. Going to do a quick reading from Creation and Blessing. Alan P. Russ writes about Genesis chapter 40. A third test of Joseph's faith came while he was in prison. He had kept himself pure from the temptress, but suffered imprisonment for it. The question to be answered was whether or not he had abandoned his dreams. That Joseph did not lose faith is proven by his willingness to interpret the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. After all that happened, he was still convinced of his ability to understand dreams and therefore of the meaning of his own. This passage makes it clear that God put his servant in this adverse situation to test his perseverance in the promised hope. Joseph seized the opportunity to demonstrate his faith, and when the dreams were fulfilled exactly as he predicted, he must have been greatly encouraged in his faith. Genesis 40 is clearly dependent on the general context of the Joseph story by virtue of the repeated motifs, which means that the surrounding chapters must be used in interpreting this chapter. The sets of 2 dreams, first Joseph's chapter 37, then the cupbearers and the bakers, chapter 40, and then Pharaoh's, chapter 41, link the passages together. Joseph's dreams predicted his destiny. The dreams of the cupbearer and the baker formed a test for Joseph's perseverance, and the dreams of Pharaoh provided the opportunity for Joseph's ascendancy. The dreams of the cupbearer and the baker spoke of life and death, respectively. In this way, their dreams anticipated the dreams of Pharaoh, which spoke of plenty before the famine, or the prospects of life before the prospects of death. The polarity of ideas in these dreams corresponded to Joseph's experiences of moving from favor to slavery, chapter 37, from bounty to bondage, chapter 39, and finally, from prison to dominion, chapter 41. In all the experiences of Joseph and the dreams that he interpreted, the Lord God was demonstrating his sovereign authority over success and failure, bounty and fame, and life and death. This chapter provides the second episode in Joseph's rise to power in Egypt. Its structure shows that it is a self contained unit, but its substance interrelates with the surrounding context. In this context, this chapter illustrates the endurance of faith in adversity. God prompted the demonstration of Joseph's faith by giving him dreams to interpret. Had he given up on his own dreams, he would never have offered to interpret the two of this chapter. Joseph did not waver in his faith. Moreover, his triumph here must have built up his confidence for interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh when that call came. Along with this major point in the clear statement of the passage that the interpretation of dreams comes from God, not Joseph. The confession should silence all ancient and modern mystics who would claim to possess such power. Joseph was asserting that the Egyptian magicians could not interpret the dreams because God had not revealed the answer to them. Without that insight, they were in the dark. A minor theological point can be drawn from Joseph's protestation of innocence, which appears here for the first time in Joseph's speeches. It opens the study to comparisons with the other passages in which the innocent protest that they suffer unjustly. In chapter 32, Westermann shows the structure of this chapter and how its symmetry unites the scene. The meeting of the two officials offered Joseph some hope for deliverance, but after it was all over, he was forgotten in prison. The heart of the passage concerns the dreams, but between the two explanations in Joseph's appeal to be remembered because he had been imprisoned unjustly. The central position of this request shows that it is the predominant idea in the episode that this event is indeed the preparation for Joseph's being remembered. When Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker had disturbing dreams in prison, Joseph accurately foretold the cupbearer's restoration and the baker's execution, but his request to be remembered was quickly forgotten. In the outline, we'll see Pharaoh's cupbearer and the baker were sent to Joseph's prison for gravely offending their king. When the cupbearer and the baker had disturbing dreams, Joseph interpreted their dreams, foretelling the cupbearer's restoration to his post and the baker's execution. The cupbearer and the baker had disturbing dreams and became dejected because no one could interpret them. Joseph implored them to tell him their dreams, asserting that the interpretation came from God. Joseph interpreted their dreams, the dream of the cupbearer. The cupbearer related his dream, in which he gave a cup of wine to Pharaoh that he had squeezed from grapes from a 3-branched vine. Joseph explained that within 3 days he would be restored to his post. Joseph requested that the cupbearer help obtain his release from prison. Then there was the dream of the baker. Expecting a positive interpretation too, the baker related his dream in which the birds devoured baked delicacies for Pharaoh that he was carrying in 3 wicker baskets atop of his head. Joseph explained that within 3 days, the baker would be executed and hung on a stake from which the birds would devour his flesh. The dreams were fulfilled 3 days later, when Pharaoh granted amnesty to the cupbearer, but executed the baker, just as Joseph had foretold. But the cupbearer forgot to mention Joseph to Pharaoh. In the development of this exposition, according to Ross, God's servants often find themselves in situations that can discourage their faith. The first part of the chapter records the setting for the events, namely the imprisonment of the cupbearer and the baker in the ward in which Joseph was imprisoned. The expositor may need to recall the situation at the end of chapter 39 in order to provide a thorough explanation of Joseph's plight. In these verses, as well as the 2 indications of Joseph's unhappy circumstances, first, it was the ward of the captain of the guards to to slaughter, butcher. And second, the text says that Joseph was bound. He was bound there. Naturally, he was freed from his fetters when he was to serve in jail, especially when the jailer appointed him to take charge of the cupbearer and baker to serve them. But there is evidence here, and in Psalm 105:18 through 19, that Joseph was kept in bonds. Into this unhappy setting came two servants of the king, the head of the cupbearers and the head of the bakers. The head of the bakers is used twice more in this section. These men had offended the king in some way and fell prey to his wrath. Joseph could hardly have suspected what lay before him when these men were put into his care. For the moment, they were two more people he had to serve in his duties in prison. Several observations can be made from these verses. First, Joseph continued to serve faithfully. He continued to serve faithfully and receive appointments to task, even though he was in a most unfavorable and discouraging place. Second, the narrative reveals that the prison was the most disagreeable place for Joseph. Later appealed for help to gain release. Third, God was beginning to move to bring about Joseph's release and ascendancy, even though it was not known to Joseph. In fact, the introduction of the cupbearer marks the turning point of Joseph's career. He had fallen as far as he would. In spite of the disagreeable conditions in which Joseph found himself, he continued to serve faithfully in whatever responsibilities he was given. The reader can certainly learn from Joseph's example of patience and obedience, but when the events of the chapter unfold, the reader can learn the reason for patience and faithfulness. God was beginning to work. God's servants must take every opportunity to demonstrate their faith in spite of their circumstances. God provides his people with opportunities. The opportunity for Joseph came when two prisoners had dreams in one night. At first, the men simply looked sad. Once again, the narrative begins a dialogue section with a ra, ah, and a hene. Joseph looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. In his questioning, Joseph asked, "Why do you look so sad today? Why are your faces bad today?" They were dejected because there was no interpreter for the dreams they had. The word used here for interpreter, poter, occurs in biblical Hebrew only in this section of the Bible. It is far more common in Aramaic and later Hebrew, as well as the cognate languages. The word signifies the interpretation of dreams with their symbolic meanings. It eventually came to be used for secret interpretations of a special class of people. The two prisoners knew that no such interpreter would be available to them. We're reading from Creation and Blessing, Alan P. Ross. This is a reflection, a commentary on Genesis chapter 40. He goes on to say in the development of the exposition that the faithful seize opportunities to demonstrate their faith. Joseph's response to their reason asserts that interpretations come from God. Do not interpretations belong to God? The implication of this statement seems to be that God will tell their dreams through him. He had not lost his confidence in God or in his being one of to whom God revealed interpretations. Joseph thus invited them to tell him their dreams. The rest of this section details how Joseph interpreted their dreams. The chief of the cupbearer had a dream that was a favorable interpretation. The dream reflected his profession and showed by the repetition of the word Pharaoh that he had a close relationship with the ruler. The ripening grapes signified that Pharaoh would lift up his head and restore him to his position. The motive to lift up the head signified a restoration of favor. To this favorable interpretation, Joseph added his personal request. He asked, "But remember me when it is well with you, and show kindness to me, and make mention of me to Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house." Joseph anticipated that things would go well with this man. He thus appealed to the faithfulness of the cupbearer to assist him in getting out of prison, twice using the verb remember. We're continuing to reflect on Genesis chapter 40 by reading a supplemental text of Creation and Blessings by Alan P. Ross. In support of this appeal, Joseph explained his plight in a rare moment of self-defense. The construction is emphatic. "I was surely stolen from the land of the Hebrews," referring to his being sold by his brothers. Then he added that he had done nothing to deserve prison, for he was falsely accused. His protesting of his innocence adds to the idea that God was testing him, for he was suffering without a cause. The second dream interpretation was not so pleasant, although the baker anticipated that it was going to be. The baker's dream anticipated death. It reflected his profession as well. But as the birds were eating the bread he was carrying, so they would eat flesh. So they would eat his flesh when Pharaoh had him hung. For the second time now in Genesis, birds of prey are used to signify oppression, the first being in chapter 15. In telling the interpretation to the baker, Joseph repeated the expression of the first interpretation, but with an ironic twist. "Pharaoh will lift up your head from you." The expression probably does not mean a beheading. Rather, Pharaoh would hang the baker. The word mialeka, from you, may signify that the favor would be removed from him. For to lift up the head signifies a restoration to favor. In the last part of the expedition, God's servants often find encouragement through the results of their faithful actions. The third section reports the fulfillment of the dreams, just as Joseph had interpreted them. This development must have been a tremendous encouragement to the faith of this young man. It would increase his confidence that he was right, that he had not misunderstood God's revelation to him in dreams. He was sure that God would yet use him, even though he had waited 11 years. Of course, the tension he faced in his imprisonment was not resolved by this reinforcement. The last verse stresses that the chief butler did not remember him, but forgot him. The rising expectations of Joseph thus had reason to falter. He was forgotten. The knowledge that he was correct might have seemed little consolation while he was in prison, but it was consolation. Others may have forgotten him, but God would not. He had a future. Joseph's faith could not be destroyed by the circumstances, which was exactly what God was looking for in a leader. Joseph had been stolen from his land and then wrongly imprisoned. But when the opportunity arose for him to exercise his faith in God, he did. He was able to discern the interpretation of dreams correctly. His faith was confirmed. Now he was ready for greatness in public. God tests his people's faith in his promises before he entrusts them to positions of greater responsibilities. To those who are convinced that God desires to use them in greater capacities, will demonstrate their unwavering faith in the midst of discouraging situations. That wraps Creation and Blessings, an excerpt on Genesis chapter 40. I'll hop back on in just a little bit. Bye, everybody.